Africa This Week, a new program that features and analyzes all the top news and events that took place across the continent during the week, is coming on Home Digital FM. The 1 hour week in review program will exhibit experts and commentators to look back on the news of the past 7 days and break down stories and issues across Africa that everyone is talking about. Africa This Week will feature guest of the week and engage people at the center of every key news, every story in the best interactive, entertaining and informative way possible. Africa This Week on Home Digital FM 99.9 every Saturday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. starting from next Saturday, October 22nd. Africa This Week with me, Bojang Jnr. See you there. Hello and a very warm welcome to your week in review program Africa This Week, looking at the continent's top stories over the last 7 days. Coming up in this edition, Nigeria's Electoral Commission said up to 240 polling centers would not be used for voting in the upcoming elections as no one had chosen them due to the insecurity in the surrounding areas.
No new registrants choose the polling units and no voters indicated interest to transfer to them during the last continuous voter registration exercise, mainly for security reasons.
Authorities of Burkina Faso, Guinea and Mali called for the readmission of their countries into ECOWAS and the African Union after being suspended following countries in recent years. Prosecutors indicted 5 police officers over the death of a Senegalese teenager who was shot dead in the city of Dortmund last year. Elsewhere on the continent, the trial of hundreds of alleged rebels accused of assassinating former Chadian President Idriss Déby Itno started in a special court located at a prison outside the capital in N'Djamena. And a Kenyan senator ejected from parliament for wearing a white suit stained red in an apparent menstrual activism campaign.
Unfortunately, I've been kicked out, because I'm on my periods. And we are not supposed to show our periods when we are on our periods. And that's the kind of period stigma that girls and women are having out there.
In our human interest segment, as Traditional Council of Liberia officially banned the practice of female genital mutilation in all parts of Liberia, we meet a popular Liberian journalist who had to go into hiding with her baby after being targeted by powerful traditional leaders for writing an in-depth newspaper article critical of FGM.
I went into hiding for 3 weeks, almost a month. I was sleepy everywhere. I would tell anybody, literally, I was like a bat hanging from every possible tree.
In the maiden edition of our new segment, Spoken Words, a young South African poet gave us the lost letter, how she traded her virginity and pride for new hairstyle and designer shoes.
I'll leave you in joyful ignorance of my acts while I try to forget that I gave my body away for a new hairstyle and Levi's shoes. My husband to be, I traded what was meant for you with the guy that was 32 for a stationery set.
Also coming up in our special guest segment, on the occasion of World Radio Day this week, we feature Ben Malo, a Ghanaian radio journalist who was one-time deputy editor of BBC's Network Africa and Focus on Africa under British broadcaster Robin White.
Totally unbelievable and inspiring, because from a village where you used to listen to the BBC, you didn't know what the studios look like, what the people look like. Suddenly, by some grace of God, you end up in London in the studios of the BBC, meeting these people face to face instead of just listening to them through the radio.
These plus sports and more on the program. Stay with us.
Africa This Week, coming to you from Home Digital, 99.9 FM in the heart of Brikama.
Sheriff Bojang Jnr.
Thanks for joining us. We start with Nigeria, where the head of the Electoral Commission, Mahmoud Yakubu, said up to 240 polling centers would not be used for voting in the upcoming elections, as no one had chosen them due to insecurity in the surrounding areas. Ahead of the February 25th presidential and parliamentary elections, separatist and gang violence has been a major concern for Nigerians, especially in recent months. When new voters register in Nigeria, they are allowed to choose a polling center. Most people choose the nearest to where they live because movement is restricted by security agencies on election day. At a meeting with political party leaders in Abuja Monday, INEC Chairman Yakubu said despite the insecurity issues, the commission had increased the total number of polling stations to 176,846 from 119,973 2 years ago.
There are 240 polling units without registered voters spread across 28 states and the Federal Capital Territory. They range from 1 polling unit to 12 polling units in each state and the FCT, except Taraba and Imo states with 34 and 38 polling units respectively. No new registrants choose the polling units and no voters indicated interest to transfer to them during the last continuous voter registration exercise, mainly for security reasons. This means that no elections will be held in these polling units.
The chairman of Nigeria's Electoral Commission, Mahmoud Yakubu. Well, Nigeria's economy has been overshadowed by an ongoing cash shortage as the nation ramps up for next weekend's elections. Nigeria's cash crisis is the fallout from a currency swap that has caused havoc and protests. On February 8, following the difficulties faced by Nigerians in accessing the redesigned banknotes, the Supreme Court gave an order restraining the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, from enforcing the deadline for the phasing out of the 200 naira, 500 naira and 1000 naira notes, pending the hearing of a lawsuit brought by 3 northern states challenging the new currency redesign. The order came as a relief for many Nigerians as part of the country had been thrown into chaos, while frustrated citizens besieged ATM points in a bid to access their money. However, the CBN refused to act on or comment on the court order as the new development generated controversies among Nigerians. Now, the central bank governor Godwin Emefiele insisted that the bank's position remained unchanged despite a Supreme Court order.
The CBN is working hard to shift pressure, to shift resources to those areas in order to ease the tension. The situation is substantially calming down since the commencement of the over-the-counter payment to complement ATM disbursements and the use of super agents. There is therefore no need to consider any shift from the deadline of February the 10th.
That was Godwin Emefiele, the governor of Nigeria's central bank. The authorities of Burkina Faso, Guinea and Mali have called for the readmission of their countries into ECOWAS and the African Union after being suspended following coup d'etat in the countries in recent years. The foreign ministers of Burkina Faso, Guinea and Mali, Olivier Ruamba, Maurice Sanda Kouyaté and Abdoulaye Diop respectively held a summit meeting in the Burkinabe capital Ouagadougou, where they agreed to join forces to try to achieve their readmission into the sub-regional and continental blocs. The joint communique issued after the summit stated that the 3 countries coordinated efforts and carried out common initiative for the withdrawal of the suspension measures and other restrictions, including the economic sanctions imposed against them. Thus, they have indicated that the AU and ECOWAS measures affected populations already impacted by insecurity and political instability and deprive both organizations of the contribution of the three countries necessary to overcome major challenges. The ministers also stressed that these measures represented an attack on sub-regional and African solidarity, which, according to them, is at the heart of the integration, regional and continental cooperation. They queried that the sanctions did not consider the deep and complex cause of the political changes in reference to the social unrest that preceded the wave of uprisings in the three countries due to the increase in insecurity and the deepening of the economic and social crisis. Meanwhile, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has announced the release of $80 million in emergency aid to Burkina Faso to help it cope with a food crisis aggravated by the war in Ukraine. The aid would help support measures to provide emergency assistance to acutely food insecure households in Burkina Faso, according to the IMF. It said the financing would specifically allow for the distribution of food and drinking water, subsidized agricultural inputs and cash transfers to eligible households. Now to Ghana, where Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta Wednesday met protesters from the Pensioner Bondholders Forum who gathered for the sixth day in front of his office to protest against the inclusion of their investments in the domestic debt exchange program. They have been protesting to demand a total exemption of their investments from the program. Former Chief Justice Sophia Akufo, who joined the protest last week Friday, has threatened to sue the government if their pension funds were included in the debt exchange program. But addressing the protesters, Minister Ofori-Atta said they had nothing to worry about and questioned why they were still protesting at the Finance Ministry.
I had a press release a couple days ago, and I thought I had made it unequivocally clear that all government bonds will be honored, and that therefore, whether you are voluntary or not, whether you have tendered or not, it will be respected. So I really want to understand why we are still here, so that if there's anything more I can say, I can do that. But really, if you look at the press statement, it emphasized the fact that this was voluntary, and about 15-16% of the pensioners actually tendered, but they chose to. The bulk of you did not, but I had indicated that it was voluntary, which means that we will honor those payments. What I tried to do in giving you the option was that about almost 80% of you have bonds that go beyond 5 years, from 5 years going. And so in the new arrangement where I have brought everything down to below, from 5 years down, it makes it easier to get your lump sum money faster. That's your choice. It makes it easier. Anytime you are able to get your money ahead of time is good for you. But that's really your choice.
Ghana's Finance Minister Ken Ofori-Atta. Prosecutors in Germany Tuesday said that 5 police officers have been charged over the death of a Senegalese teenager who was shot dead last year. According to German media reports, police had been called to an incident at a foster home in the western city of Dortmund on August 8, 2022, because the 16-year-old refugee had allegedly threatened to harm himself with a knife. Officers claimed that the teen, identified as Mohammed Drame, had run toward them with a knife, whereupon they used pepper spray and 2 tasers before shooting him with an automatic pistol. German news agency DPA reported that the officer who fired the shot was being charged with manslaughter, while his superior officer was being charged with incitement to dangerous bodily harm. 3 other officers were charged with dangerous bodily harm, according to the news agency. Public broadcaster WDR quoted Dortmund prosecutors saying they believe the operation was disproportionate from the start. The incident sparked a debate in Germany about police violence against minorities and their handling of cases involving people with mental illness. Gabon's President Ali Bongo on Monday proposed shortening the presidential mandate from 7 to 5 years as he began consultations to prepare for elections this year and measures to prevent violence. More than 2 days of deadly unrest followed Gabon's last elections in 2016 after the opposition rejected Ali Bongo's victory, alleging fraud. The proposal will require constitutional reform and a vote in parliament. 64-year-old Bongo has been president of the oil-producing West African nation since succeeding his father Omar Bongo, who died in 2009. He has not said whether he will run for a third term in the 2023 race, for which an exact date has not yet been set. There are currently no constitutional term limits in Gabon. His 2016 victory triggered clashes between police and protesters, during which the parliament was torched. Estimates of the death toll from the unrest range from a few people killed to more than 50, while hundreds of others were arrested, according to U.S. democracy watchdog Freedom House. You are listening to This Week in Africa on Home Digital with me, Sheriff Bojang Jnr. A reminder of our top stories. Nigeria's Electoral Commission said up to 240 polling centers would not be used for voting in the upcoming elections, as no one had chosen them due to insecurity in the surrounding areas. Authorities of Burkina Faso, Guinea and Mali called for the readmission of their countries into ECOWAS and the African Union after being suspended following coup d'etat in the countries in recent years. And prosecutors in Germany charged 5 police officers over the death of a Senegalese teenager who was shot dead in the city of Dortmund last year. Still ahead in the program, Tanzanian government banned from schools several books on sex education, accused of contravening cultural and moral standards in the country. And Equatorial Guinea announced its first outbreak of the Marburg virus, a highly infectious disease similar to Ebola. We also have our human interests, spoken words, and special guest segments, plus sports and more. Stay with us.
Africa This Week, coming to you from Home Digital 99.9 FM in the heart of Brikama.
The trial of hundreds of alleged rebels accused of assassinating former Chadian President Idriss Déby Itno has started in a special court located at a prison outside the capital in N'Djamena. It is the last mass trial instigated by the transitional government, which has faced the opposition, protesters and the international community. Chad's chief prosecutor and lawyers confirmed on Monday that the hearings would be held behind closed doors at Klesum prison southeast of N'Djamena, where the suspects will also face charges of terrorism and undermining state security. Chief Prosecutor Muhammad El Haj Abanana said over 400 people were on trial, and lawyers gave a figure of 454, of whom 386 would be present for the hearings. In early 2021, the Front of Change and Concord in Chad, the most powerful of several rebel groups opposing Déby's regime, launched an offensive from its strongholds in southern Libya. On April 20th, the army announced that Déby had been killed while leading troops against the rebels. A day earlier, he had been declared winner of a presidential election that gave him a 6th term in office. Déby, who had ruled Chad since 1990, was criticized for his authoritarian rule, but was a key ally in the West's anti-jihadist campaign in the Sahel, particularly due to the relative strength of Chad's military. Monday was World Radio Day, which is observed annually on 13 February to celebrate the power of radio. The theme for this year's event was Radio and Peace, highlighting the role of radio in conflict prevention and peace building. The day was proclaimed in 2011 by the member states of UNESCO and adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2012 as an international day. Here is a message from Taufik Jalasi, Assistant Director General for Communications and Information Sector at UNESCO, on the occasion of the World Radio Day 2023.
Radio continues to be the most easily accessible communication medium, educating, informing, and entertaining all segments of society. It can reach the most remote areas and the most marginalized people. Radio plays a fundamental role in counseling, mediation, and reconciliation for harmonious human relations, promoting peace to overcome civil, national, and international conflicts. The theme of this year's World Radio Day is Radio and Peace. It comes at a time when we face growing misinformation and disinformation, polarization, violence, extremism, and increased natural disasters due to climate change, among many other societal and natural challenges. Let us use radio to alleviate such situations by providing balanced, diverse, and inclusive programs that promote peaceful and harmonious relationships. Lastly, we applaud all technological innovations that facilitate access to the radio and expand the dissemination of its programs in order to spread messages of friendship, hope, and peace.
Taufik Jalasi, UNESCO's Assistant Director General for Communications and Information Sector. The Tanzanian government has banned from school several children's books on sex education accused of contravening cultural and moral standards in the country. Education Minister Adolphin Kenda told reporters on Monday that the government was banning these books from schools and other educational structures because they are contrary to cultural and moral standards. Among the books banned is Diary of a Wimp, Greg Heffley's Logbook, a series of American graphic novels that have sold millions of copies worldwide. The government did not specify why it was targeting this diary featuring a teenager, but it assured that inspections were being conducted in private and public school libraries to ensure that it had been removed. The minister also included in his first list of unacceptable books a textbook on sex education and books mentioning LGBTQIA groups. Last week, the head of state, Samia Suluhu Hassan, called on student leaders to be wary of imported cultures from abroad, warning that if you are Tanzanian, live according to our culture. A Kenyan senator was on Tuesday ejected from parliament after attending a session while wearing a white suit stained red in an apparent menstrual activism campaign. Gloria Owoba of the ruling coalition was ejected a day before she was due to table a motion on a bill to provide free sanitary pads as part of efforts to end period poverty. According to reports, senators disrupted Tuesday's afternoon session to draw the parliamentary speaker's attention to what they refer to as Owoba's inappropriate dress code. The lawmaker spoke to journalists outside the parliament shortly after she was kicked out of the chamber.
Unfortunately, I've been kicked out, because I'm on my periods. And we are not supposed to show our periods when we are on our periods. So, and that's the kind of period stigma that girls and women are having out there, to the extent that they kill themselves. Because I think people don't understand that the stigma starts from the point of, not accepting a very natural thing like having your periods. Yeah.
Kenyan Senator Gloria Owoba. Still in Kenya, the Inspector General of Police, Japhet Kume, had traveled to Turkana County to personally lead a multi-agency operation that brought together officers drawn from the Special Forces of the National Police Force and the Kenya Defense Forces as ordered by President William Ruto. IG Kume visited an area where just 2 days ago bandits laid an ambush on a police convoy, killing 3 officers. He promised to put banditry to an end. The operation kicked off on Thursday after the expiration of a 3-day amnesty for communities to surrender arms. Speaking to reporters from the front line, the IGP said Kenya could not allow the bandits and criminals to gain courage and start targeting police officers.
We cannot allow the bandits, criminals, to gain courage and start injuring, shooting, maiming our officers. Likewise, we have a duty to ensure that members of the public can go about their day-to-day activities and their living. People of this region have no option. They must learn to coexist. This habit of one community attacking the other one will not be allowed to continue. We have the capacity and the will.
Kenya's Inspector General of Police Japhet Kume. In neighboring Uganda, different cohorts of military deployed for peacekeeping operations in Somalia have gone for 27 months, spread across 5 years without pay. This, according to reports, is despite the European Union, the mission's biggest funder, regularly disbursing funds to cover allowances for at least 5,000 peacekeepers serving in war-torn Somalia. Officials confirmed that the latest cohort, who returned from Somalia on December 31st, 2022, did not receive any payment for all the 12 months they spent in the Horn of Africa country, while the one it replaced in November 2021 was also not paid for 9 months. The peacekeepers rely on donations from different sources, including the EU and UN. Dio Akiki, Uganda's deputy army spokesperson, explained.
And these donations don't come at the same time. Some countries, some donors delay, some others bring their money in the time, but the African Union has to make sure that all of the money is consolidated and passed on to the troop contributing countries to eventually reach the troops. We focus our soldiers to go to serve as Africans, saving their African brothers. We don't tell them that they are going there to earn a living. No, our focus is not on money, much as it is needed, but our soldiers are well grounded on the ideological concepts that we give them when they are going to Somalia.
Dio Akiki, Uganda's deputy army spokesperson. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has declared a national state of disaster over the country's rolling power shortages. Energy provider Eskom says its aging coal-fired power plants cannot keep up with demand and it's been imposing scheduled cuts. The blackouts are weighing on business activity and South Africa's economic growth. The president made the declaration during his annual State of the Nation address. The key highlights of the address were load shedding, unemployment, poverty, and rising cost of living, and crime and corruption.
The National Disaster Management Center has consequently classified the energy crisis and its impact as a disaster. We are therefore declaring a national state of disaster to respond to the electricity crisis and its effect.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. While opposition parties have blasted Ramaphosa over the rolling blackouts in the country, here are the reactions of the leaders of Opposition Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, and economic freedom fighters, Julius Malema.
Through the lens of this year's State of the Nation address, we arrive at one inescapable conclusion, that you, Mr. President, are somehow guilty of something even worse than the thing that you once accused Zuma of. For if President Zuma presided over 9 wasted years, you, sir, have presided over 5 disastrous years. What happened under Zuma was a tragedy, but what has happened under your watch is a farce. The new dawn was a false dawn. Ramaphosa was a delusion. Your supposed commitment to sweeping economic reform was hollow. Unemployment has skyrocketed from 36% to 43% since Mr. Ramaphosa became president. Murder has increased by 20% over the same period, with 70 people killed in our country every single day. And as we all know, the rolling blackouts have now become a daily feature of permanent life under the Ramaphosa era. Yes, Tumamina was an empty slogan. Yes, the new dawn was a cruel mirage. And yes, Palapala showed us who he really is. And yes, we too wonder, as he said, why he is still doing the job. Gave us the real impression that this job is nothing but a side hustle for him.
To say to the people of South Africa, what you are listening to is not a real state of the nation, it's a hearsay. Our country is in the middle of several man-made crises. The man who's currently at the center of South Africa's crisis is a full-time businessman, animals trader, possibly a puppet of both the domestic and global capitalist interest, who has said that the job of president for him is a part-time job, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. The reality is that, Mr. President, nothing is working under you. You are a man on top and doing nothing. And that is very irresponsible of a man to be on top and do nothing. If you agree that ESCOM has failed to discharge its responsibility, ESCOM has always had a minister, and that is a minister of public enterprise. And if we need a separate minister, it means that minister has failed. Why are you so scared to remove an incompetent minister who has failed and collapsed everything in the state-owned, under a state-owned enterprise?
That was Julius Malema, the firebrand leader of South Africa's opposition Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF. First, you heard from John Steenhuisen, the leader of Democratic Alliance, DA. Equatorial Guinea has announced its first outbreak of the Marburg virus, a highly infectious disease similar to Ebola. The small Central African nation of about 1.6 million people reported 9 deaths and 16 more suspected cases after a sample sent to a laboratory in Senegal on February 7 came back positive. The health minister told reporters that a health alert had been declared in Kientem province and neighboring district of Mongomo after consulting with the World Health Organization and the United Nations. The 9 deaths occurred between January 7 and February 7, according to officials. WHO said that the Marburg virus has a fatality rate of up to 88% and spread from one person to the other through direct contact with bodily fluids. The disease comes from the same family of viruses as Ebola. Symptoms consist of high fever and severe headache, with many patients developing hemorrhagic symptoms within 7 days. WHO said there are currently no vaccines or antiviral treatments for the virus. From news and current affairs to our human interest segment, the Traditional Council of Liberia on Tuesday officially banned the practice of female genital mutilation (FGM) in all parts of Liberia. The announcement was made by Chief Zanzan Kawa, the chairperson of the council, while speaking at a program marking the celebration of International Day of Zero Tolerance. Well, before this landmark achievement for anti-FGM campaigners in Liberia, speaking out against FGM was too dangerous in many communities where the practice was seen as an integral part of cultures. Maya Azongo, a popular Liberian journalist, had to go into hiding with her baby after being targeted by powerful traditional leaders for writing an in-depth newspaper article critical of FGM some years ago. This is our story.
Liberia! It's your day! It's time to party!
Welcome to Liberia, a country that for decades personified bleak, death, violence, and tears. In 2006, the election of Africa's first female president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, ushered Liberia into a new dawn of peace, progress, and prosperity. It brought a lot of hope to the citizens whose lives were devastated by the brutal civil war. Known as the Iron Lady for her toughness about issues she believed in, President Sirleaf's status as a woman became a huge inspiration and moral booster for Liberia's women who bore the brunt of the civil war, as well as women from across Africa. In one of her interviews, the president acknowledged the power of her status.
Oh, I think if you begin to look at what's happening with women, I mean, I don't take credit for it all by myself. Lots of strong women have been gaining grounds in politics, in business or in any endeavor of society. But I do believe in Africa, I inspired women to see that you can really get there. If you persevere, you determine, and you stay course.
But when a daring Liberian female journalist took on the taboo subject of female genital mutilation, a traditional practice so politically sensitive and entrenched in the Liberian culture, The iron in the Iron Lady president must have melted because that journalist received no protection from danger from President Sirleaf and her government. The journalist is May Azongo, who after the killing of her father by rebels in 1990 during the Civil War, pursued journalism as a way to give a voice to people suffering. Since 2002, upon returning from exile as a war refugee, she has exposed the plight of ordinary people, particularly women and girls who have been victimized by issues that were long host in her society. But the biggest highlight of May's career was her article on FGM for the independent daily newspaper Front Page Africa.
I will always call myself the voice of the voiceless. I like to do stories about ordinary people because I feel that they don't have voice, and if I don't voice what they have to say, nobody will know what they feel. I brought this story to light due to the medical implication. The procedure is bad, meaning they use unsterilized instruments to cut these people. I see human rights violation. Why? I said because these people are not only grabbing young women and cutting them, but babies. You are violating that child's right. Then you telling me you getting her ready for womanhood at the age of 5? That human rights violation. You violated that child's right. So I got tired and sick of it.
FGM is widely practiced in Liberia. By writing against it, May had enraged Liberia's traditional rulers who hold great powers in the Liberian society and often influence political decisions. Following a wave of threat, she had to go into hiding with her teenage daughter.
Nobody knew what I was going through. To live in hiding, I can tell you it is not easy. It is not easy. You are living in a place that you got no freedom. Since I went into hiding, the police officers or the police department did not protect me. I went into hiding for 3 weeks, almost a month. I was sleeping everywhere. I would tell anybody, literally, I was like a bat hanging from every possible tree.
As May continued hiding, her office was regularly visited by people looking for her. Rodney Sie is the editor of our newspaper, Front Page Africa.
When the story broke, May's life immediately became in trouble. We had people coming here asking where she lived. If you have traditional leaders coming after you, they can send someone to your house, they can put poison in your food. It's even more difficult than fighting a corrupt dictatorship because you're dealing with traditional forces.
May's ordeal had succeeded in forcing the Liberian authorities for the first time to commit to stop FGM. But despite this achievement, she felt she was victimized because first, she was black, and second, she was Liberian.
If it was a white journalist reporting on female genital mutilation, nobody would care about her. But because May Azongo is from Liberia, or African journalist talking about the culture, they say it's not my business to tell about my culture to the white people. It's all hush, hush, hush.
And the threats she faced had not deterred her from striving to give voice to women's rights in Liberia. She went on to report on the rape of a 14-year-old girl by a police officer. That powerful report led to the arrest of the officer. Such reporting has exposed the impunity that has protected perpetrators of sex crimes in the post-war country. Today, May continues to represent the voiceless women in her society, and nothing will keep her away from that task.
What I wanted to be changed has been changed. The issue has been addressed. So call me anything you want to call me. I don't care. I just don't care.
Liberian journalist May Azongo. Now time for our new segment, Spoken Words. This week's words come from young South African poet and spoken words artist Puno Seleso. This is called The Last Letter.
My current lover and beau, this letter is for you. Remember when I was 13 years of age and you had been alive for 32? When you promised to fulfill all my material needs if I paid you with physical deeds. Remember that day. Remember that day it all began, the first time my body sang. I never felt so human before. We laid in your bed, that surface of virgin sacrifice and the impregnation and birthing of death. We were journeying towards a loveland of euphoria, but never did I feel the weight of my condition as I did in your arms. My condition of sinful humanity, yes, I felt it as your touch filled and stained my panty. We drank and got drunk on the spring of desire. I told myself I was fulfilled, but my reflection in the stream screams liar. So I lapped your juices up till all I felt was libido's aftertaste on my tongue. Never have I felt so part of the body of mankind. As you suckled on my breast, I planted kisses on your chest, and you, seeds of intimacy in my mind. With every taste of flesh, the seeds began to grow. Because of the trace your fingers left, the cravings began to take root. And with the final thrust, the tree of lust broke through my earth's virgin crust. You lie inside me, breathing out the fog of passion heavily, leaving traces of it on the windows for all to see. The sin is busy uniting with me. With every thrust there's a fire between my thighs, but the raging furnace of my soul dies into a mere glow. I search your face for truth, for an answer, for confirmation, for some sort of identity, but it's void of liberty. Just an invite to a lifetime of bondage, a lifetime spent as a lust-filled hostage. I think the reasons to call me pure are now less than few. Futile desires are futile too lost in love land to notice the cursed and poisoned view. This is all because I tasted you, your fruit. Because my heart began to beat along with my eardrums when you called me cute. We made our exchange every day. You ate my flesh, juices ran down my leg, just so that I could pay school fees and afford bacon and eggs. We eat from the palm of the world. This food tastes like gall, but still we continue to spread our legs. We eat it all. You are my fellow human, lover and friend. But I wish we had stopped at holding hands instead. Instead, I have broken my alabaster box on your bed. You know that precious oil I was meant to pour over the feet of my true soulmate? The fragrance of my love that would embalm his feet in a glorious scent. Instead, it seeps into your sheets. It leaves stains of images on my brain, a rotting sense of sanity. I've barely grown breasts, yet in the temple of my body, you are already a resident guest. And now, to the future mister I am to be betrothed to. I'm sorry that the ring that you will lay down as a deposit will be stained with the mud hanging in my heart's closet. I want to give my all to you, but then I'll have to scramble across the globe trying to collect all the pieces of me that have been taken. So please don't be mistaken. Our two hearts don't make a whole. The spear that was plunged into my body destroyed our union by making a cavity in my soul. But for now, I'll leave you in joyful ignorance of my acts while I try to forget that I gave my body away for a new hairstyle and Levi's shoes. My husband-to-be, I traded what was meant for you with a guy that was 32 for a stationery set. The hardest part of it all, my betrothed. I haven't even met you yet.
Spoken words by South African poet Puno Seleso. If you want your thoughts or writings to be aired on the spoken word segment, please send me an email at sheriffbojang.jr@gmail.com. You write and we will record and broadcast. As simple as that. Now time for sports. Ghanaian international footballer Christian Atsu is still missing about 2 weeks after an earthquake in Turkey, with his agent appealing for more resources to aid rescue efforts. While 2 pairs of Atsu's shoes were found in the rubble, the player himself remained missing as the search for him continued. The Ghana international was declared missing a day after the 7.8 magnitude quake that hit Turkey and Syria last Monday. In an update via Twitter, Atsu's agent Nana Shekere confirmed that the search was still ongoing, but some of Atsu's belongings had been located. He said he received confirmation that thermal imagery was showing signs of up to 5 lives, but added that he was told the only real confirmation of life was through sight, smell and sound, and unfortunately rescuers were not able to locate Atsu. The former Newcastle United and Chelsea player moved to Turkey last September and scored his first goal for Hatayspor just hours before the devastating earthquake. Now time for our special guest segment. On the occasion of World Radio Day this week, my special guest is one of Africa's most popular names in radio journalism. Anyone who listened to BBC's Network Africa and Focus on Africa programs from the late 90s to early 2000s would have heard about and loved Ben Dotsi Malo. The Ghanaian broadcaster rose through the ranks at the BBC Africa Service to become deputy editor under popular British editor Robin White. Ben Dotsi Malo went on to become communications director and presidential spokesperson in Ghana for former President John Dramani Mahama. He was also a communications advisor to the President of the UN General Assembly. He is currently the chief editor of UN News and UN Radio. Ben joined me on the line from New York to discuss his life and career as a radio journalist.
I grew up in a village in the Volta region of Ghana. And from secondary school, I would go back to my farming community. And in order to maintain a link with the outside world, I would borrow the radio of my senior brother. When we would come back from the farm, you want to maintain a link with the world, and I would listen to the radio. And some mornings, I would borrow the brother's radio, and I would listen to Ghana Broadcasting. But then I realized that the BBC with the Hilton File of Sierra Leone was also quite strong to pick up in the morning. And I got introduced to the BBC that way, and then eventually ended up working with Hilton File in Bush House in London, and also presenting the program that I used to listen to as a secondary school student. So
and we'll have a lot of BBC. We'll have a lot to talk about when it comes to, your role as a BBC staff, a BBC broadcaster. But you talk about borrowing your brother's radio as a boy in the village. At that time, you've never even been to Accra, and you would expect that people in the cities, big cities and towns would be addicted to radio that way. How did your love affair with radio start back in those days in the village?
I think it is that curiosity to expand my knowledge of the world beyond this little farming village where I grew up going to elementary school with no shoes, no sandals. And again, once I've been to secondary school in Kata Secondary School, which is today about 30 minutes drive from my village, you interacted with other children from other parts of Ghana. And on vacation, when you got home, that curiosity, that interest, that enthusiasm with radio continued. So I could tune in to the BBC. It was the only entertainment in a community where there was no running water, there was no electricity, there was no TV. And of course, today in my village, they have electricity and water thanks to the government. But when I was growing up, I had to use a lantern to do my studies. And the transistor radio using dry cell batteries, that was a great lifeline and a connector to the rest of the world. But again, it's thanks to the generosity of this older brother who didn't have much himself, but you will listen to the radio.
And he would always let you use his radio.
Thankfully, this brother called Koshi Apache, he was generous enough, because sometimes I'll take the radio in the evening and I will sleep with the radio, in the sense that the radio will be kept on until the morning and the battery would have gone down. And he never.
And who was responsible for replacing? Who was responsible for replacing the batteries?
Oh, he always did. He was my big brother back in the village doing farming. I was a student coming home once in a while for holidays. He knew I didn't have money
to buy a radio.
But this was just a gracious brother.
Do you remember the first time you ever had your own radio from your own pocket?
I think when I went to the University of Ghana in 1981, by then maybe I had some dispensable income and I had my own radio. And even in the University of Ghana, I even listened more to Hilton File, to Jenny Horrocks, to Robin White, and many other people. And what
at the BBC
was, yeah, in the university, I continued listening even more avidly. My English improved. My English was not very good when I started out in secondary school, being the village boy that I am and I was. So listening to the BBC helped me improve not just my spoken English, but my knowledge of Africa. I had Pan-Africanist tendencies in Hilton File and the crew, and sometimes I would send views and comments to Talkback, and I would get a letter back or some T-shirts or some souvenir from the BBC, which then encouraged me to listen more and offer my ideas. And it was nice to hear my name mentioned on the BBC from London whilst I was down here in Ghana. So it was quite encouraging.
Where did that make you a popular kid in the university campus?
To some extent. Friends who come into my dormitory at the university will see posters of the BBC with Hilton File. Sometimes I got special publicity pens from the BBC. So when you're writing with them, people become curious. How did you get that? And then there was one particular day when it was a time they had live aid concerning the famine in Ethiopia. And I was in Accra at the time. They called me from the BBC through a friend's father's landline. And I was able to make some contribution, which was broadcast the next day.
Oh, wow.
And that was the first time my voice was heard on the BBC.
Yeah. I was going to ask that, being, from an avid listener of BBC programs to a contributor writing letters, you ended up being a broadcaster, BBC broadcaster in London. You described this as accidental. Can you tell me, how did it happen?
It so happened that when I finished the University of Ghana, I earned a scholarship from the University of Ghana to go and do my master's in Glasgow University in 1987. So on my way to Glasgow, when I was in London, I visited the BBC studios, and it was like I was a member of the family with Jenny Horrocks, Hilton File, Neil Curry. I was well received. And then we built on that relationship. So even when I was in Glasgow, up north in the United Kingdom, I maintained connections and things took on from there. And I became a producer and a presenter at the BBC eventually.
And the first day you arrived in the boss house to report for duty for the BBC, how did that feel?
Totally unbelievable and inspiring, because from a village where you used to listen to the BBC, you didn't know what the studios look like, what the people look like. Suddenly, by some grace of God, you end up in London in the studios of the BBC, meeting these people face to face instead of just listening to them through the radio. And one particular person I have to mention, Jenny Horrocks, who would usually send the publicity material to contributors to Talkback. She received me so warmly, as if she knew me from long ago. She remembered some of my comments. if she had been rude or nasty to me, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you as a former producer, presenter, or editor of any program on the BBC.
And then you rose through the ranks to become one of the greats when it comes, in the BBC African service. You spent years and years from childhood all the way to, university, when you were at university, listening to BBC presenters present. And when you were in that position to present for other people to listen, did your childhood as an avid listener of BBC made you a better journalist, a better broadcaster?
I strongly believe that is the case, that from being a listener to the BBC, I developed that innate, deep sense of appreciation of what the listener will be drawn to, what the listener prefers. If somebody should meet across Africa in the morning, what kind of make them forced to be late to work or to school? How should this be presented? So, in addition to the formal journalistic training that I had at the BBC, I believe I had this advantage of having been at the receiving end and having that innate, hidden and deep understanding of what registers best with the audiences and with the listeners. It was an honor for me, and I am thankful to God for making a way for me that I couldn't have predicted, I couldn't have arranged myself.
I briefly worked under you, and I know how supportive you were to me when I was young in the Gambia as a journalist. And Ben, I must ask this, what was your best journalistic moment at the BBC?
Oh, there were several of them. Number one, under the leadership and the mentoring of Neil Curry, I was able to be part of the pioneer teams that launched a number of new programs. For example, Fast Track, I was the first co-presenter.
It was a sports program.
I co-presented Africa Live, which is now Africa Have Your Say. We started that. Martin Davis and Jenny Horrocks produced it, and I was the pioneer co-presenter. I also launched a program called Education Express, and I think a number of programs. So, and then secondly, when I was blessed enough to be chosen to cover the first all-race democratic elections in South Africa after Mandela was freed from prison in 1994, that was a major highlight for me.
You became loved and adored by listeners, people even were obsessed with you and your broadcasting. Then suddenly your love affair with BBC came to an end. You left for the United Nations Radio. Why did you take that career path?
The school hymn for Keta Secondary School, my secondary school, says, "Once to every man and nation comes a moment to decide." I wasn't very keen to leave the BBC, but I got an offer here at the United Nations, and I sought advice from my bosses. I sought advice from leaders in my family, and it was felt that I had skills that could benefit the United Nations. And so I could come and offer my skills to the United Nations under the leadership of that famous Ghanaian, that famous African Kofi Annan, to see whether the skills the BBC had given me could be of use to the UN. And if I couldn't make a mark here, I had the option to return to the BBC. I guess the BBC is still waiting for me to return.
So Ben, it wasn't even about the fact that maybe you were upset with something, you were not happy at the BBC any longer, that's why you left. That wasn't it?
Absolutely not. The BBC trained me. The BBC gave me opportunities. The BBC had just at that time promoted me to be second in command to Robin White. I was deputy editor for Focus with oversight over all our correspondence in Africa. So it was difficult to leave the the BBC for the United Nations.
Can we confidently say that radio will always be the big deal when it comes to people's source of information, especially on the African continent?
It's a very good question, Sheriff, but it would be totally arrogant for those of us who love radio to think that radio will always remain king in this fast-changing digital climate. Even my illiterate mother, before she passed away, had a cell phone. Even in the village, people who did not go to school, they have a cell phone. The way of communication is changing and changing. Radio must change to adapt. And as far as I'm concerned, it must serve the greater good to make a positive impact in the lives of the listeners.
Ben Dotsimalo, thank you very much for joining us. It has been a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure as well. I don't know whether I should say Jerejev or Nangadev in Wolof.
Both of them work.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Our special guest and that brings us to the end of this edition of your Week in Review program, Africa This Week, on Home Digital 99.9 FM. I'm your producer and presenter, Bojang Jnr. Thanks for your company, and join us next week for another edition of the program.